Welcome back to Great Commission Alliance Media. We are continuing our interview with Dr. Jeff Zweerink of Reasons to Believe. You can find out more about the ministry and about Dr. Zweerink at reasons.org. He is an incredible apologist and astrophysicist. He writes, he speaks around the globe, he teaches on these topics, and we are just so honored to have him for this discussion today. We've been talking about a lot in this interview. If you've missed our past questions with him, don't forget to go and check those out on our channel. Remember, the Great Commission Alliance Media channel on YouTube has so much, including this, and don't miss it. You'll get a lot out of those past questions we've asked Dr. Zweerink. In our last one, we were talking about the beginning of the universe. One of the topics that came up in that question is the multiverse. You've seen it in movies, you've heard about it in popular culture. It's a big deal. You see it everywhere right now, it seems. Dr. Zweerink has written on this topic. I interviewed him a few years ago on my radio show, the God Solution Show, on this topic. But the book, and I encourage you to pick it up at reasons.org, is Who's Afraid of the Multiverse? Now, let me give you a little background. A lot of times, the skeptic will use the multiverse for a couple different things. A, they try to use it to get out of a beginning. It doesn't work because the multiverse needs an explanation too, if it's even a thing. Two, a lot of times they'll use it to get out of statistics. So when confronted with the impossible statistics concerning things like abiogenesis, that's a fancy term, you can look it up later, a lot of times the skeptic will simply respond, well, hey, in an infinite number of universes, even infinitely impossible statistics would have happened somewhere. This is where we are, so this is where it happened. So a lot of times they use the multiverse to get out of the beginning and to get out of statistics. What I want to ask Dr. Zweerink today is, who's afraid of the multiverse? Do we need to be afraid of the multiverse? Does this hurt our faith? And conversely, can the atheist use it to get out of things like the beginning or the statistics that we see in creation? What are your thoughts, Dr. Zweerink?
Well, I remember when I first encountered the multiverse as an apologist, I was at a scientific meeting. I'd given a talk earlier the day on my scientific research. There was another fellow talking about astrobiology, and during the Q&A time, I asked the fellow, when could we tell the difference between maybe a created and a naturalistic origin of life? And that question created a bit of ruckus during the meeting, as I had a good dialogue with the person who was giving the talk, but it stimulated a conversation around the dinner table where a colleague of mine had commented that he never thought that the supernatural might be testable. And so we ended up on about a 45-minute conversation. I really didn't say a lot, except, occasionally I'd point out, hey, Big Bang cosmology points to a beginning, and that points to a beginner, and our universe is fine-tuned, and that points to a fine-tuner or a designer. And conversation went on for a while. And at one point, the fellow turned to me and asked, he goes, yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but in what universe are you talking about? And I remember just not having a response because I knew it was a reference here to the multiverse, but not really having a good response because I hadn't thought about it. And it does seem like the multiverse gets rid of a beginning and the multiverse gets rid of the design, if you will. And so I spent a fair bit of time thinking about that. And what I found is that a lot of Christian apologetics would just say, oh, we don't need to worry about the multiverse. It's untestable. It's not scientific. And I realized, lo and behold, there's actually good scientific reasons to think a multiverse might exist. And you can't, there's ways to test it. It's not as testable as we want it to be, but there are ways to test whether a multiverse exists or not. And so it got me thinking about the question, as a Christian, what do I do with the multiverse? Is this a threat or not? The short answer of what I found was that where the multiverse may seem to get rid of a beginning, at least in terms of Hawking's singularity theorems and what had been done before, it may get around that evidence for a beginning, but there's actually very strong evidence that the multiverse has a beginning as well. So even if a multiverse exists, or an inflationary multiverse exists, it still had a beginning or points to a beginning. And when you talk about the probabilities, every time you talk about a probability, you have to deal with the probability and the sample size. And a multiverse gives a much, much larger sample size. which means that if something can happen, it does. But that doesn't mean that your design argument goes away, because in a multiverse, you have to worry about all the ways you can produce life, not just the ones that we think are kind of rare, like us being here, because you could have, if we're just natural beings, not natural physical beings only, then you get the right arrangement of atoms and you've got consciousness there. And so you have to worry about, does that happen out in the vacuum of space? And are we one of those weird fluctuations, or are we all a collection of fluctuations? And when you get in and analyze all of that, what you find is that, lo and behold, if we want to argue that we're actual creatures that have a genuine history, you still have to, that's a very small segment of all the different life that's possible, all the different conscious life that's possible. And so you still end up with a design argument. So even the multiverse, even if it exists, you still have a beginning, you still have design, you have evidence for that. And still it points to the truth of Christianity. And of all things, Christianity actually kind of talks about a multiverse. There's this realm, there's the angelic realm where spiritual but not physical beings live. There will be the new heaven and new earth, which is a new universe, if you will. So the Bible talks about a multiverse in some fashion. So it really doesn't surprise me if we might actually live in a multiverse. And so what this allows me to do is step back and say, all right, let's continue to investigate the multiverse. This thing that appeared to be a threat to arguments for Christianity. It's not a threat to the truth of Christianity. It was a threat to some of my arguments for Christianity. As I explored more deeply, lo and behold, those arguments actually became more robust. And so, that's kind of why I titled the book the way I did. Who's afraid of the multiverse? It seems like Christians ought to be, but as you investigate further, it actually strengthens the evidence pointing to the truth of Christianity, which means those who are Christians shouldn't be afraid of the multiverse. Maybe some other people ought to.
Right. I love your response there, and I'm definitely no longer afraid of the multiverse, Jeff. Hey, I want to confirm for our viewers that the multiverse does not get anyone out of a beginning, so it doesn't get anyone out of the Kalam cosmological argument for God's existence. And even though there might be indications of the multiverse because of certain scientific equations and so forth, that doesn't mean the multiverse is settled and true and something that we could use to get out of a beginning. And again, even if it does exist, it would need an explanation as well. Additionally, you could never justify using the multiverse to get out of statistics. Science is not done that way. If I ever went into a chemistry class and tried to use the multiverse to get out of bad lab results, I'd fail the class. I could never just appeal to something like this to get out of doing statistics and good science in the lab. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do. People like Dawkins that'll say things like, a blind stroke of luck is why we're here. And you got to confront that and say, that's not science. That is make-believe. And when he appeals to something like the multiverse for his blind stroke of luck, I think he's getting far away from science and into the realm of fantasy. And we need to come back to science. And I'm not afraid of this. You shouldn't be either. Dr. Zweerink, any last thoughts on the multiverse for our viewers?
Again, I would just say there's a lot of people out there that think a multiverse exists. Would not surprise me at all to find that we live in a multiverse, but rather than this being a challenge for the Christian faith, we can actually use it to advocate and argue for the truth of the Christian faith, and that the God who created us actually wants to know us and has given us evidence for that.
Great answer. Hey, again, you can find out more about Reasons to Believe and Dr. Jeff Zweerink at reasons.org. We'll be finishing up this interview with one last question. I hope you won't miss it.